Hello, my name is Sridhar Inamdar, and today we will be speaking on graph theory. I trust that you already have one lecture on or some lectures on graph theory, and some of it what I am saying might be repeated. However, there will be some interesting things which will come later. So what will first thing is what will I assume? So reproduce. Okay. So these are basically what I will assume is set theory. Some sets. So what in set theory will I assume? First thing is the concept of sets and subsets, and also little bit of functions between two sets. They will not be used in great detail. However, a familiarity of that is very useful. Alright. So what is the start? What is a graph? That's the first question we can ask. So typically you will see a drawing of a graph, and then you will say that this is a graph, something of this type. This you think is a graph with these rounded things are called vertices. V1, V2, you number them like that. Okay. But mathematically speaking, this is not a very well defined object. For example, I can draw the same graph like this also, right? And then do something like this. Essentially, there is no difference. So this is my V3, and V3 is connected to V4 and V2. So I just start with V4 here, then V4 goes to V5, V5 to V1, V2, and this remains the same. V6, V7, V8, V9. So this particular graph and this particular graph, they may look very different. However, they are actually the same graph because I have just renumbered them, and then all the graph structure is still the same. So what actually mathematically what we define graph as, not by its drawing, but something little more abstract, and that is where I will use set theory. So what is a graph for us mathematically? Graph is a set V of vertices and a collection of two subsets, that is subsets of size 2. Of V. These are called edges. Okay. So for example, this particular graph now will have 9 vertices. For this G1 now is V1, V2 up to V9, and the edges and the edges we will denote them by E, and E1 will be for example set the edge V1, this edge as V1, V5 will be connected as V1, V5. These are two subsets, endpoints of an edge, V1, V2. Like that. So whenever you see an edge, you look at its endpoint. Those endpoints will be two distinct points, and that will give me a two set. So that these are the two sets. So all the things. And now if you look at this graph G2 and see G1 and E1, it will be the same. So therefore, in mathematical terms, this graph is same as this graph. That is what. Similarly, I can just increase the length of this graph, or I can just make this graph something like this edge something like this. It's meaningless, but it looks different, right? But however, as a 2 subset, whenever there is an edge, we only look at the end points. We don't look at what happens in the middle. So therefore, whatever way you draw this particular graph, as long as the vertices and edges remain the same, we can say that the graph is actually the same graph. So this is the first mathematical concept that I wanted to point out here, that a graph is not just a drawing. A drawing is a model of this collection. This particular thing has been pictorially drawn here, but the same collection can be pictorially drawn something else also. So these are the different models of the same graph. This is the first concept that you should get used to. It's not just what it looks like, but the underlying structure behind it, that is the set V, and the collection of 2 subsets of size 2, which are the endpoints. Now here there is one point. We are just doing the first lecture in graph theory, so I don't want to complicate the matter. Some of the graphs sometimes may have an edge which starts and ends at the same point. For example, you might have seen graph like this. This is an edge. So V1, V2, V3. And then there is an edge which is, both endpoints are the same. If both endpoints are the same, then you won't get a 2 subset. You will get V1, V1, which is the 1 subset. But we do not consider such. So such a graph, since it's the first approximation of the most general thing, it's called a simple graph. So a simple graph now, let me just define simple graph. Let me erase these drawings now. So a simple graph is a graph where every edge has distinct endpoints. And also there are no repeated edges, and no edge is repeated. So for example, if you have things like this is not a simple graph, there are 3 edges. So what we say is that a simple graph is a graph where such a thing do not happen. Only we have a triangle here, then it's called a simple graph. And a finite simple graph, which is what now we will for this lecture consider. A finite simple graph is a simple graph first of all, because it's a simple finite simple graph, right? Simple graph where number of vertices is finite. So you don't have infinite set of points. Say for example all integers in the real numbers, and then you look at the line joining consecutive ones. This is a graph which has infinity number of vertices. So there are graphs actually which has infinite number of vertices. However, today we will not consider. So what today we will discuss deals with only finite simple graphs. This is the first thing. Okay. So now what would be, what kind of questions can be asked in graph theory? This is the first point I want to tell you. So the first question that comes to mind is that how many distinct models are there for the same graph? So given the graph, now you know graph is not just one picture, but graph is actually a set vertex V and a collection of 2 subsets. Given that, in how many different looking ways can we pictorially draw it? So that's the first. So that's the first question. So question is, how many distinct models of a graph. Graph is vertices and edges. Vertices is a finite set of points and edges is a collection of two subsets of those points. So one different models of exist. Now if you ask this question, it makes sense language to understand it, but the answer is not very well mathematically posed, because the answer will always be infinity. For example, if you just have a triangle here like this, that means a 3 set and all 2 subsets of this. So this corresponds to 1, 2, 3 vertices, and edge set is 1, 2, 1, 3, 2, 3. Right? But I can always stretch this 3 like this, 1, 3, and this 2 comes very close. Now this looks like a different model, right? Because the length of the edges are different. Or I can just draw on a circle instead of like these 3 points like this. These are all same looking things. So answer will be of course infinite. I can just translate it to some other place also. This is not what we mathematically ask this question. But there are completely different ways of drawing picture. For example, look at this picture. These are the kind of different models that we are interested in. Look at this graph. So there are 6 vertices. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. And the edges are 1, 6, 1, 2, 1, 5 and 2, 3, 3, 4, 3, 6, 4, 6, 1, 5 and 5, 4, 5. These are the 2 subsets which gives me all edges. Now this particular graph looks different than this graph. It's not a question of changing just the length and making minor modification. It genuinely looks different. Here there is one 5 pentagon and here there is a hexagon, and there are one extra point here, there is no extra point here. So, but however these 2 are the same graphs. This is essentially a different model of the same graph. These are the kind of differences. So how will you say these are the same graphs? We will just number the vertices here like this. 1, 2, 3, 6, 4, 5. Just look at this numbering now. So 3 is connected, you will see 1, 2, the subsets are still the same. 1, 2, 1, 6, 1, 5, 1, 2, 1, 6, 1, 5, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, that is already there. 3, 6, 3, 4, 6, 1, 6, 3, 6, 4 and 4, 5, 1, 5. So if you look at this data of vertices and 2 subsets, the data from this model and data from this model is exactly the same. Another example which is very interesting is this example. Just look at this. So there are many interesting ways, not just very stupid way of changing the model, but very interesting way of changing models. So this is what I call the famous Peterson graph. This graph is very famous graph, because if you want to formulate some kind of statement about graphs, it is useful to check for such graphs. These are what I call test cases. So this is Peterson graph is one of the very famous graphs. So if you number them like this here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And if you draw it another graph like this, another, instead of pentagon, again I will change it to hexagon. So this takes care of 6 vertices. There are 10 vertices, and the remaining 4 vertices I will add like that. I will add like this. And my edges are like this. Now this graph looks even more different the difference between this graph and this graph looks even more stark than these two. But these two are the same. How? I will just number them and then you can check for yourself that they are the same. 1, 2, 7, 9, 4, 5. So 1, 2, 7, 9, 4, 5. And 6, 10, 8, 3. This is 6, this is 10, then this is 8, and this is 2. Okay. Now if you look at this graph, the associated data is set of 10 points, and the edge set is 1, 2, 1, 6, 1, 5, 1, 2, 1, 6, 1, 5, and for 6 that is 6, 8, 6, 9, 6, 1, 6, 8, 6, 9, 6, 1, and this way you can check that the same two subsets are there, it's just the model is different. So therefore, even though this particular question is not mathematically well posed, you can make it well posed because essentially there are many different interesting looking models of the same graph, and this leads us to something very important, that is called automorphism of a graph. So graph is number of distinct models of graph exist is not a good question, but what is a good mathematically posed questions is following. I will just write down the question and then I will explain the graphs. So how many automorphisms? Exist for a graph G? Or we can just say another question is that some variation of that question would be, given two graphs, given two models or two drawings of graph, when can we say that they are models of the same graph? There are distinct models of the same graph. So this leads to something very interesting. We can define automorphism. Maybe right now you may find it very abstract and somewhat too complicated. But this is how mathematicians will ask questions about graph theory. What are the automorphisms? So what is an automorphism now? Let me just explain. So an automorphism of a graph. Auto means within itself, and morphism means a function. This is how you should read automorphism. Isomorphism is same as before, isomorphic. So and then morphism. An automorphism of a graph G. Now G, remember, is a collection set of vertices V and collection of two subsets of is a function. This is where I use the functions between two sets, the prerequisite. So is a function let's call it some Greek letter, phi from B to V, such that two vertices are adjacent. So that V1, V2 belongs to E. E is a collection of two subsets. If and only if phi V1, phi V2 also belongs to E. So if you look at those examples, we have just modified the various the number. So automorphism is is a function which is isomorphic, which is 1, 1, 1. And so which is isomorphic. So this is also important. So such a 1, 1, 1, 2 function from V to V is called a permutation. So an automorphism basically is a permutation of V. This is another way of saying the same thing, which preserves edges. And one of the very interesting and not at all simple question in mathematics is to determine all permutations of a given graph. So determination of automorphism is very hard. All automorphism. That is like different determination of all models. For example, all determination of automorphisms of a graph is not easy in general. Some of the simple graphs you can are such that they are actually simple in the sense that automorphism groups can be easily determined. For example, if you look at, as I said, you should test case is Peterson graph. So if you look at the Peterson graph here, then the automorphism, this is G, then automorphisms of G have 120 elements. Some of you may know that the number of permutations of V is n factorial if the number of points in V are n. So therefore we know that automorphism is some finite number, it's not going to be infinite. But exactly determine what number it is, it's not very easy in general. You can find out for yourself, for fun, what is the automorphism group, let's say, of a triangle. Automorphisms of, there are 6 of them. Number of automorphism is 6. And the number of automorphisms of a thing is 8. Number of automorphisms of a pentagon will be 10. So you will see that you can see a pattern and you can try to see that if you have a cycle, what will be the automorphisms of that cycle, permutations. Okay. So this is one question in graph theory. In this lecture, we are just going to state what are the graph theory definitions and some basic concepts. Okay. So one of the basic concepts in graph theory is when given to drawings of graphs, when can we say they are the same graph or not? In general, it is very hard. And then there is another related concept which is in computer science known to be NP-complete problem, which is the finding out a pattern inside graph G. That is called subgraph isomorphism problem. So what is that thing? Suppose I don't have to know the actually isomorphism of a graph G. If G and H are 2 graphs which are given to you, can we find a copy of H inside G? This is called subgraph isomorphism problem. Subgraph matching or isomorphism problem. and this is known to be NP complete in computer science. So for example, if you have this Peterson graph, okay, and suppose you have given a triangle. This is my G and this is my H. Then my claim is that there is no copy of H inside G. There is no triangle, because you see there is no common vertex which is so in the triangle. This V is a commonly joined to two other vertices, W1 and W2. So the vertices which is commonly joined, vertices which is joined to W1 is called neighbors of W, and these are just names. So there is a common neighbor here. But in this case, there is absolutely no way that any two guys which are joined don't have a common neighbor at all. So there is no triangle. So in this case, the answer is negative. However, if you look at a square, then what do you see? Then the answer is positive, right? Because this is 1, 2, no, just 2. No, answer is still negative, because 1, 2, and then again there is no. If you look at the in a rectangle, two vertices which are not neighbors will have two common neighbors. Well, whereas that cannot happen here, because this and this you can see that they are not common. So even a quadrangle you cannot find, even a square you cannot find inside this. However, if you look at pentagon, then you can easily find that this one direct one pentagon stands staring right at it. So what this subgraph matching or subgraph isomorphism problem tells you is that given a pair G comma H, when can we say that G has a copy of H inside it? So this is also another variation of isomorphism problem. So these are the questions that people think about in graph theory. All right. Now we go to further detail that how can we say whether two graphs are isomorphic. We cannot prove, but can we say that given two models they are not isomorphic? That much is sometimes the question becomes easier if you are trying to prove negative things. So here is a little bit variation of the same problem. Given G1 and G2, can we say that they are not isomorphic? They are not same models of the same graph. Now you might think that this is exactly the same question. Whether if they are isomorphic, then you have proved that they are not isomorphic. But sometimes being not isomorphic is a much weaker condition. Showing that they are isomorphic, we actually have to give one function between these two. But for showing not isomorphic, we don't have to give anything. We can prove that certain properties of G1 does not hold for certain properties of G2. And if they were isomorphic, the properties would have held. Therefore, by method of contradiction, we can prove that they are not isomorphic. This is a standard method of proof in mathematics, method of contradiction. Just like induction is a very standard procedure in proving things in maths, method of contradiction is equally common in proving things. What does it do? It assumes the contradictory things. It assumes first that what we want to prove is wrong. And then proves that this assumption is wrong. So if we assume something is wrong and we prove that is wrong, then whatever we assume, so therefore what we want to prove must be correct. There is a simple logic to this. It's called method of contradiction. So here what we suppose if they are isomorphic. So we want to prove something is not isomorphic. How will we use method of contradiction for that? What we prove, we assume that they are isomorphic. So method of contradiction applied to this is what we want to prove is wrong. That means we assume that G1 and G2 are isomorphic. Right? And then we prove that this cannot happen. So therefore they cannot be isomorphic. So how do we prove that this cannot happen? And this is where the concept of invariance comes in mathematics. This is again a very deep concept, and it's been used in all subjects of mathematics, all parts of mathematics. Invariance is a property P that is unchanged. That's why the word invariant. Invariant means unchanged under isomorphism. So if you prove that if you have an invariant for G1 which is not an invariant for G2, they cannot be isomorphic, right? Because invariant, if they were isomorphic, and if G1 had that property P, then G2 also must have that property P. However, we have proved that G2 does not have that property P. Therefore, they cannot be isomorphic. That's the method of contradiction applied to this particular problem. How do we now actually give those properties? That's the question. So the first property that we give is the degree sequence of a graph. I was told that you have already attended one lecture or some lectures on graph theory. So you know what is the degree of a vertex in a graph. If V belongs to vertex A, V is a vertex in a graph G. Then degree of V is number of edges. Now remember, number of edge is a 2 subset of edges. So that 2 subset may contain this point or may not contain that point. We only look at the number of edges that contain V. Or another way of saying is that is the number of edges with one endpoint V. This is the same thing, contain means is the same as with one endpoint V. So this is called a degree. And if you look at the degrees and put them in increasing order, that's called a degree sequence of a graph. This is a sequence of degrees in increasing order. Okay. Increasing order of a graph. Now you can check for yourself that this degree sequence does not change under isomorphism. This is an exercise for you. So prove that degree sequence of G remains unchanged. Remains unchanged under isomorphism. So it is actually an invariant. If I have a particular drawing of a graph, let's say triangle, and if I say length, some of the lengths of these edges, L1, L2, because in my particular drawing, then this sum of the length of the edges, or the maximum length of edge or minimum length of the edge, whatever one you want to define, that is not invariant under isomorphism, because this graph is same as this graph, and the maximum, minimum and the sum is all changed. However, this graph is isomorphic to this graph. So not all properties that you can think of are actually invariant under isomorphism. So one has to be very careful, and in mathematics, in particular in graph theory, you will be told in a group, in a book or in a course, only those properties which are invariant under isomorphism. So anybody says something like a cycle or the planarity, any graph, you should see that this property is nice, well-defined property from mathematical point of view. And well-defined property from mathematical point of view just means that it is invariant under isomorphism. So let's look at this way. So suppose I have now these two graphs, two triangles and an hexagon with some edges. Now both have six vertices, and both the degree sequence is 3, 3, 3, 3, 3. Each vertex has degree 3. So degree sequence of this G1 and this degree sequence of this G2 is just 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, 6 times. This is the degree sequence, because here also every vertex has degree 3. However, these two are still not isomorphic. So we cannot say that the degree sequence are same means they are isomorphic. This is the logical statement, that only if they are isomorphic, degree sequence will remain the same. The converse is not necessarily true. And these two are not isomorphic because, for example, I can go from this path, this point to this point. I cannot go from this point V1 to V2 by traveling along the edges. I will remain only on this part. I can never jump here. But whereas I can go from any point here to any point there by traveling on the edges. So going from one point to another point by traveling through the edges is also an invariant under isomorphism. That is called connectedness. So here is another invariant P2. So degree sequence is not good enough for us here to show that they are not isomorphic. But some other property will work, P2. That P2 is connectedness. So this brings down to the second property, P2, connectedness. This is kind of disconnected, right? And whereas this looks like one single piece. So that's why the name of the property is connectedness. G is called connected if we can travel from any point, any vertex, from a vertex to any other vertex. Via edges. In a model of G. So traveling won't make sense if you only have subsets, right? What do you travel? For that you actually draw a picture and then you can draw. So what we start is you look at a graph G, which is set of vertices and collection of two subsets. Find out a particular model which represents those two edges in pictorial way. In that model, if we can go from one vertex to any other vertex via edges, then the G is called connected. Now if you have a different model, it is yet another exercise for you to check that under isomorphism, if any 2 points being connected is invariant. So this is what connected. And here this is not connected graph and this is a connected graph. So even though the vertices are the same, number of the degrees are the same, still the they are not isomorphic. That's what it is. Okay. So here is one question. Now I want to see, from now on we will only look at first of all finite, simple graph and connected graphs. If it is not connected, then we look at one connected piece of it, study it, understand it, then look at another connected piece, study it, understand it. So we can understand the entire graph piece by piece. So ultimately we will, if we understand all connected pieces, we will understand any graph. That's the logic behind only looking at connected graph. So the first question that we can ask is that being connected must impose, this is a simple thing, some condition on the number of edges. In a graph. This is a common process, right? Suppose I have got 10 points. And then I am able to go from one point to any other point by an edge. So there should be at least so many edges there. So how many number of points are there? Fix one guy. Because I should be able to go from here to here. The shortest way I can go is by jumping by just one thing. If I have to go through some other place, then at least one more edge will be added. So what one can say, that if the number, and here how many number of edges are there? If there are here, there are n minus 1 points, and this is the one V1, and this is V2 up to n minus 1 point, then each thing will give me n minus 1 edges. So it is, in this simple example and a simple way of looking at things, one kind of guesses that if you have a connected simple graph on n vertices, it must have at least n minus 1 edges. And this is the first theorem that we prove actually in graph. Any graph on n vertices with less than n minus 1 edges. Remember, an edge is a 2 subset. So with a less than n minus 1 2 subsets is not connected. Most of the theorems in graph theory is exercise in logic. So I will ask you to prove it using induction. Try to prove it. So another way of stating this theorem, I am not going to prove this theorem, but this is true. Another way of stating this theorem is in terms of inequality in mathematics. So here is the same theorem. Let G be a graph on n vertices, and let E equal to number of edges in G. Then G is connected, implies E is greater or equal to n minus 1. Just a restatement of this. Now in mathematics, whenever there is an inequality, if it is not a strict inequality, that means it is not E strictly greater than n minus 1, if it gets not equal to, then usually the case when it is equality holds is something very special. This happens again and again in maths. Whenever there is an inequality, and the equality case is very interesting. So what we are going to understand next is what happens when E is exactly equal to n minus 1. So remember our chain of thought. First we wanted to see graph G. First thought of as graph G just as a drawing. But then the say two distinct drawings which do not look same at all can lead to the same graph. So we gave a definition of a graph in terms of vertices and two subsets. Then depending on that definition, we define an isomorphism of these two between two different models, concept of isomorphism, where there is a function between two vertices, so that one edge is here if and only if another edge is there on this side, and that function is a permutation of these points. So this is the definition of two models being same. The moment two models are being same, we ask how many different models can exist of the same graph. That's too hard or too vague a question to answer. So what we were taught was the automorphism of automorphism group, it's called. If you know what is a group theory, actually set of automorphism forms a group, but that's a different story altogether. So set of automorphisms of the graph, that's too hard a question. And then what we changed our question slightly to show to ask when can we say they are not isomorphic, which looks really no change at all in our question, but not being proving they are not isomorphic turns out to be much easier because we can associate different properties. And these properties we found out one property is degree sequence, second property is connectedness. Then given connected graph, we found out that the number of edges has to be greater than or equal to n minus 1. In this chain of thought, now we are suddenly from this abstract plethora of graphs, we have now isolated some interesting graphs to study first before we study something else. What are those interesting graphs? Finite simple graphs on n points with edges equal to n minus 1 and connected. This is the way we make slow progress in mathematics. We start with the definition and each time we identify something which is interesting to us, and with that interesting property we reduce our set of possibilities to some lesser set of possibilities. Of course, it will become, if you reduce it too much, then it is not interesting. So these contrasting demands that we want to be general enough so that it should not be totally uninteresting, but we don't want to be too general so that too many unrelated examples will come in. This is always a case in maths. So here what we have come down to this is study connected graphs on n points with n minus 1 edges. I mean, why did I say all this? I could have just started that we will study this. All I wanted to say in this lecture is that how mathematicians think of something as in a very natural way. It is not that suddenly some idea comes to them and they study like on that idea. Everything is logically one step at a time, and then ultimately in a book you will not see all that logic, because after all a book has a restriction on number of pages. It cannot give all possible explanations. So therefore they directly give you something called a tree. So we give a name first. So such a thing is called a tree. So such a graph is called a tree. And you will prove some theorem that it has no closed path. So it has no cycle at all. The tree has no cycle. And there are various theorems about this tree, and we can also what we can say is that given any 2 points, it's connected. So connected means between any 2 points we can walk from one place to another place. We can go from one place to another place over the edges. But here in a tree there is something more. Given any 2 points, there is a unique path. Unique way of going from one point to another. Since this is a very least number of edges, this is if you have too many paths of going to same place, I will drop one of the edge and still I can go from that point to another point. So there is no more dropping of edges is allowed. So therefore there is only a unique way. This is the vague proof. Again, all these statements you can check in any standard graph theory book or on the net you can check. I don't want to get into these proofs right now here. Okay. So these are the kind of characteristics. What we have understood today, hopefully, is that why trying to understand trees first is very important. And if it is not connected, but it is like collection of different trees, it's called a forest. It's just a collection of trees. I mean, what else? If it's a collection of trees, it's a forest. So therefore, it's a forest. And typically, so it is disjoint collection. So, okay. So that's the terminology you can check for it. And now here is some nice, interesting first theorem about between. So connectedness will give you some condition on the edges, but we also have degrees of vertices. And if you have too many edges, the degrees have to increase. If you have too many degrees, edges have to increase. These are just common thoughts. So there has to be some relationship between degrees of all vertices, that is the degree sequence, and the total number of edges. This is a common logic, very simple logic, not common, simple logic. And this is completely quantized. This qualitative statement is quantized in the following theorem. Let d1, d2, dn be the degrees of n vertices of a graph G. Then d1 plus d2 plus d3 plus dn is 2 times e, where e is the total number of edges. So if you look at the sum of all the degrees, then it becomes 2 times. So there is a relationship between the degrees and the total number of edges. Note that there is a 2 times e here. That is because one edge has 2 endpoints, right? So this edge is counted as a degree in V1 also and degree in V2 also. So same edge is occurring twice in each of these things. So that's the kind of logic. Again, you can check the proof, it's not very hard. This is the logic basically. That one edge gives me 1 plus 1, 2 degrees in this. So therefore, if you take sum of the degrees, it's 2 times the edges. One edge gives 2 degrees. So that's the, or this divided by 2 is the must be the number of edges. So one nice consequence of this is now we use certain, these are all integers. Of course, d1, d2, dn and e are all integers. So is that the sum of these degrees must be an even number. This is the consequence. So therefore, we can't have a pentagon, 5 vertex of something with all edges 3. So this, for example, odd number of times, cannot be a degree sequence of any graph, right? Because if this is a degree sequence of any graph, what is d1 plus d2 plus dn? It is odd number times 3. But odd numbers times 3 is an odd number. 2 cannot divide. But this is on the right hand side is an even number. That's a contradiction. So again, proof by contradiction. So if you want to prove here something that certain degree sequences, certain sequences of integers cannot occur as a graph of G, what we have done is that suppose they occur as a graph of G, then sum of the degree sequence must be even, and therefore this number of odd the degrees has to be even. In fact, something better than we can say. Why just 3, 3, 3, 3? We can say the following statement using this theorem. The number of vertices with odd degree is even in any graph G. Because if you take some of the degrees, some of the even degrees will add up to even number anyway, forget it. So the problem will only become some of the odd degree vertices, some of the odd degrees. If that is even, then we are fine. But if that is odd, some of odd numbers odd will add up to odd and total can't be even. So this is actually the consequence of this. And such things will put restrictions on which of the degree sequences can occur as degree sequence of a graph G. So many such things come out of this simple observation. Alright, let's solve some nice exercise. So here is one exercise about a tree. That will give you some flavor of graph theory. This idea of this lecture is just to give you a flavor of graph theory and make you interested in it so that you can do your own search and study on your own afterwards. So what is that exercise? Let me find out here. Okay. So here is some strange tree. Here is a problem. So find out the number of vertices in a tree. Of course, this is not enough data that has exactly one vertex of degree I for 2 less or equal to I less or equal to n. So the degree sequence looks like this. So many ones that no data is given about one. Let's call them k here. So many ones. And then there is one vertex of degree 2, one vertex of degree 3, one vertex of degree 4 and one vertex of degree m. That's all. So the degree sequence of such a tree T is this. And we are asked to find out the total number of vertices. Obviously these number of vertices are n minus 1 because each one vertex of degree 2, one vertex of degree 3, 4 and so on. So they are n minus 1. But then we don't know how many vertices of degree 1 are there. That's the data that is not given in the problem. So therefore the question basically, we can rephrase it, is that find out the number of vertices of degree 1 in a tree that has exactly one vertex of degree I or degree 2. That's another problem with this. Okay. So how will you find out this? So there is a solution. It's all tricks and this particular theorem we will use. And we are just simple application of this theorem. Since it is a tree, let's see how this theorem can be used. First of all, we have given this d1 plus d2 plus dn is equal to 2 times d. But since it is a tree, if n is the number of vertices, let n denote the number of vertices. Then E is n minus 1 because that is what the definition of a tree is. It's connected and the number of edges is exactly n minus 1. Then E is n minus 1. Therefore, if you take sum of this, if you add 1 plus 1 k times plus 2 plus 3 plus m is n minus 1, 2 times n minus 1, sorry. It's 2 times n minus 1. But what is this number? One can remove one on this side, so it is actually k minus 1 plus 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus m. And you must have heard the story of Gauss, that 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus m is m into n plus 1 by 2. There is a famous story of famous mathematician Gauss, that when he was 8 years old, he was studying in a school and the class students were making a lot of noise. and the teacher wanted to do some other work during the class hour. So many times it happens in your school also, right? So what did, the teacher wanted to keep the students quiet. So what she said that just add numbers from 1 to 100 and don't do anything else till you finish your addition. So she thought that it will take long time for them to add 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 up to 100. But when she said that and looked at Gauss, he was just sitting there. And then he said, oh, it is just 50 into 51, she said, the answer is. So she was amazed how it was. And then what he did was 1 and 100 adds to 101, 2 and 99 adds to 101, and so on. So what 50 plus 51 adds to 101, and the total sum is what we are asked for. So it is 50 times 101. So answer was 50 times 101. That is what he said. So this trick now we can use it here. We don't have to be as smart as Gauss. We can follow his step. So this is m into n plus 1 by 2 plus k minus 1, and this is equal to 2 times n minus 1. Right? So this is one equation. But we also know that this m minus 1 plus k is n. We want to find out n. N, the total number of vertices, are m minus 1 plus k. So now we have got two equations in two unknowns, n and k. M is given to us, remember, this m is given to us in the problem. Is fixed. What is not fixed is k. We don't know what k is. And this n, because n is also depending on k. N was k plus n minus 1. So since k is unknown, n is unknown, and we have two equations in two unknowns, we can just subtract and get rid of k, and we get an equation in n only in terms of m. So if you subtract this equation, this is k, n is equal to k plus m minus 1, k plus m minus 1. So when you subtract from these to this k cancels out, minus 1, and then in the end what you can solve this. I don't want to again do this work, you can do it at home, and I think what you will get is following: m into m minus m minus 1 by 2 plus 2. I think that is what you will get. I might make mistakes in calculations, so you do it yourself and check. So we have got a number of vertices in terms of the given data. If you are given a tree which has exactly one vertex of degree I for each I from 2 to m, then it must have exactly m into m minus 1 by 2 plus 2 vertices. So there are a lot of restrictions on being a tree because it has least number of edges and it is connected also. So that is the upshot of this. Alright. How much time? So I have some time. Let me just give you something now a little more advanced. So till now we have been doing just the definition, properties, edges, and then why we are defining certain properties. That is because they are invariant under the isomorphism, and the simplest possible graph that you can think of is tree. Now we go to something which is somewhat harder, and in between I will skip many steps. So sorry about that, but in one lecture we can only cover so much. What I want to do now is concept of a planar graph. And here again you have to check that this is the definition. In mathematics the definition makes sense only if it is invariant under isomorphism. Just remember that. So what we are defining planar graph is for if G is equal to VE, we always assume, remember, connected finite simple graph is connected finite simple graph then G is called planar. If there exists a model of it that can be drawn in plane without edge crossing. So for example, look at this graph. One, two, three, four. Now here there is no vertex here, remember. There are only 4 vertices and 6 edges. 1, 2, 1, 3, 1. So all 2 subsets of this. This is called a complete graph on 4 vertices. And it is denoted by K4. So this is not a planar drawing. So you might assume that this is not a planar graph. On the other hand, the same graph is isomorphic to this graph, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. This edge you keep inside, and this edge 2, 4 you draw like this. Nobody has told you that the edges has to be straight lines. There can be curved lines also. So this is another model of the same graph. As I said before, that isomorphism of graphs is tricky. So here the set of subsets, set is 4 elements, set is 4 elements, set of subsets are the same. So these two are actually the same graph, and here no edges are crossing. So in this drawing, it is planar. In this drawing, it does not look to be planar. But what we have defined planar is that there exists one model, a model, not all models, a model of G which can be drawn. And now if some other graph is isomorphic, the same copy of the model will be copy of that model graph also. So this definition of planarity, when a graph is planar or not, is independent of isomorphism, clearly. So it's a well-defined notion from mathematical point of view. And now what we want to understand is what are these planar graphs. So the question is study planar graphs. That's the point. So since edges do not cross, that's the only extra data that we have given in planar graph. We have to somehow use that data, that we have drawn this graph on a plane and the edges do not cross. How can we use that data? So the beautiful thing which Euler has observed is that when you draw such a thing, the entire plane gets divided into different regions. This is region 1, this is region 2, this is region 3, and this is region 4, the infinite region outside of all this. The moment there is no crossing, this concept of region is well defined. If there were a crossing, then the same region, for example here, this region R1 looks like R1 and R1 prime, 2 regions. But here there is no such crossing. So this is his fantastic observation, that whenever you have a planar graph, we can associate 3 different things to a planar graph. Number 1, the number of vertices. Of course, that you can do for any graph. Number 2, number of edges. That also you can do for any graph. But here is the third thing that you can associate to planar graph. The number of faces, number of regions, called faces in maths. Why this is called faces? Because again the regions are very, for example, if you look at some cube kind of structure. So look at a cube. I mean, this doesn't look like a very nice draw cube. Let us draw a cube much better. This looks more like a cube. So these lines, dotted lines are on the other side. And then each one here is a region. These are graph in R3, 3D graph, not 2D. Here this is a 2D graph. But never mind that. And this is, each region is like a face of this cube. So the same word we use even for 2 dimensions. That's the motivation for this. So it's called faces. And if number of vertices we denote as by n, number of edges by e, and number of faces by f, then there is a very famous theorem he proved that for a planar connected graph we must have n minus e plus f is equal to 2. They are not random. They are all connected. The number of edges are more, number of faces will be more, right? And number of so what is the exact equation is n minus e plus f. It's 2. There are many things that you can see from this equation, but one of the most striking thing that you can see here is on the right hand side we get a number which is independent of the graph G. This is very deep observation. Here you may draw millions of different planar graphs. Each one may have different number of vertices and different number of edges. But then the faces have to be such that this equation has to give you something which is constant, independent of whichever graph that you have. It's a very deep theorem and it has been generalized tremendously in many different parts of maths. Index theorems are there in analysis and Euler characteristic is there in topology. So this is a very deep observation in this graph theory setup. N minus e plus f is equal to. How do we prove such a thing? That this number 2 comes independent of whatever the graph is that we do. So let us try to understand. Okay. So what we do is that just look at here. I am just giving you a sketch of the proof. Actually this is the proof, but it requires a little more analysis. Suppose I drop one edge. Then what happens? The graph will still remain planar. If I draw already a graph without any edges crossing, if I remove one edge, no edge is crossing anyway. So therefore it's a new graph which is also planar, but number of regions have been dropped by 1 and number of edges is also dropped by 1. So this thing doesn't change. F minus e doesn't change because f is also dropped by 1, e is also dropped by 1, and then the subtraction remains the same. N is remain the same. So therefore you will have e minus 1 will become e minus e plus 1, f minus 1 will become f minus 1 and to cancel. So we use induction on number of edges to prove this. So what are the least number of edges that you can solve? You start with a triangle, a connected graph which is this clearly planar, no edges crossing. How many regions are there? R1 and R2. Remember we have to also equal to infinite region. So R1 R2 and then number of vertices n is equal to 3, e is also equal to 3 and f is equal to 2. So this implies n minus e plus f is equal to 2 because this cancels and you get 2. So you start with a triangle, you keep and if you add now, yeah, you see it's a connected graph. So therefore we did this. So this is essentially the proof. There is some gap in this particular naive argument because how do you come from a general graph to a triangle? It's not clear. But we can make this proof of induction work. Let's not get into the proof here in detail. But I want to say that amazing statement here in mathematics. How do you appreciate something that is good? On the left hand side is completely dependent on a graph, and on the right hand side it is a global constant which is not dependent on graph at all. So how do we get some manipulation of something which is dependent on graph to get something which is independent of graph is something of very appreciated in maths, and this kind of phenomena happens very rarely, and this is one of the very celebrated things. It was proved in 1758 by Euler. So graph theory as a subject basically started by Euler. Eulerian traits, Eulerian graphs, you might have heard the name, famous Königsberg's problem, bridge problem, you might have heard. All those things are started, and Euler was interested because he saw this deep mathematical statement inside this, not just for some playing thing or solving something, but something very deep mathematical statement, and which he generalized tremendously later on. Okay, so this is what the Euler's theorem is. Using this, the last part that I want to do is we want to now solve something called classification of Platonic solids. So this is a fantastic application of graph theory. So let us look at what we have done so far. We started with the definition of graph, not just the picture, but something which is behind it, which is set of points and set of collection of two subsets of them. Then we identified what are isomorphic graphs or not. Okay? And then we defined what are the properties of graph which will tell us something which is not isomorphic. Having the same properties does not mean they are isomorphic, but not having the same properties means they are not isomorphic. So therefore being not isomorphic is easier to prove, and that's what we proved. And from there we found out that one nice property is being able to walk from one vertex to another vertex via edges. That thing we call connectedness. And connected graph with least number of edges we call a tree. Collection of connected pieces, each one is tree, is called a forest. So therefore we have studied those. We solved one problem on trees. Then as a change of topic, we found out it's a connected finite simple graphs we are studying now. And in that it's called planar. If we can draw, now we have gone from abstract to concrete. We can draw one particular drawing of that graph so that edges do not cross. And there are examples of graphs, of course any example, any complicated example you can draw with one which is not planar, one which is planar. All we need is one planar drawing. The moment you have one planar drawing, we can associate three invariants. Again you have to check that these numbers are independent of isomorphism. So they are well defined, nice numbers mathematically. Of course number of vertices and number of edges are well defined, but the number of faces or regions is also well defined. That is one point. And given such a planar graph, this NEF, which completely depends on the graph G, when you take this alternating sum n minus e plus f, you get a constant which is global constant which is 2. This is the famous theorem of order. That is what we do. And now using this planar thing, we want to now classify all Platonic solids. So let us define first what is a Platonic solid. And that's a kind of nice application of graph theory that you will see. So then our lecture will be complete. Okay. So what's the... So first we'll define what is a polytope. There are lots of new definitions in this lecture. Of course it will take some time for you to understand and the whole thing. But at least you have seen these words. Then you can do next search and do your own studies later on. So a polytope is a solid in 3 dimensions. With flat faces, straight edges and sharp corners. Of course, this definition I kept on telling you that mathematically you have to make it precise. It can be made precise. For example, suppose you have got this 3-dimensional plane in space, and there you draw a tetrahedron, something like this. So it's the kind of prism looking thing. This thing is going that way. So it's a 3-dimensional thing, triangles are all over the place. So this is a flat face and the edges are straight lines and sharp corners. That means there is no bend. Or you look at another example as cube, our famous cube. So here also there are sharp flat faces, straight edges and sharp corners. There is no bend. So any such solid which is inside filled is called a polytope. It's a three-dimensional thing. So we are going away from graph theory. It seems like the graph theory was two-dimensional, planar graph was two-dimensional, and now here it is three-dimensional. We will come back to graph theory. Now what is a, so this is just a polytope. Now what is a polytope which is Platonic solid? So there are certain polytopes where if you take 2 points on the edge here, any 2 points inside that solid and draw a straight line within it. Now draw a straight line joining these 2 points. It completely lies within that solid. So such a thing is called a convex polytope. So I defined polytope, and now I am defining among all possible polytopes something nicer polytopes called convex polytopes. So for example, it doesn't bend inside here. Suppose I have something here like this, a piece chopped off. Then if I take these 2 points here, suppose I just chop off one a piece from here. Then if I draw a line between these two, it is outside this polytope. As a polytope, this still has flat faces, straight edges and sharp corners. But if I draw a line joining here, it goes outside the solid. So convex polytope is where it does not happen. In a cube or in a tetrahedron, it does not happen. Or a two-dimensional analog will be, this is not convex. I want to state it. So let us call, in two dimensions, this is not convex because if you draw 2 points and then line, this line is outside this thing. However, this is convex. Like this. Any 2 points you take, the line joining these two must be inside. So the convex polytope is the same thing in 3 dimensions. Convex polytope is a polytope. Flat faces, straight edges and sharp corners is a polytope such that line joining any 2 points in polytope, in it, lies inside it. So this is called a convex polytope. And now what is a Platonic solid? So Platonic solid is a convex polytope. But among convex polytope also there is a tremendous amount of regularity. So what is that regularity? That the number of faces meeting each other is the same, and so let us regular. So here is the definition of Platonic solid. It is a convex polytope. Again, here you see what we are trying to see. First, we define the concept of polytope. It is too general. In that, we found out some particular cases called convex polytope, which is more particular, not very general. Among that also, now we are finding something more, Platonic solids, which is among the convex polytope, we put more conditions. So there are less number of them, such that 1, all of its faces are congruent regular coordinates. All its faces are same, are congruent means they are same, regular polygons. So like cube for example, all the faces are squares, right? This face is a square, this face is a square, this face is a square. So all the faces are congruent to each other and they are regular polygons, polygon of size 4. And second condition is that all the vertices have same number of faces adjacent to them. Same number of faces adjacent to them. So let us look at here. If we look at vertex here, then this guy, top fellow, and then this guy and this guy, these 3 guys are adjacent to this. These other 3 faces are completely disjoint from this. So, and you can see the same for all one of them. So therefore this is a Platonic solid. Similarly, if you look at tetrahedron, the pyramid, so it's coming up here like this. So then you see that each vertex has again 3 and all faces. The bottom part is also triangle, this is triangle, this triangle. So this is another example of a Platonic solid. Now given this Platonic solid, somehow I have to use graph theory, right? So we have to remove a lot of data, and what data we keep is basically these edges and points. Remove all this inside stuff. Then you will get a skeleton like our bones. So that is called a one skeleton. So one skeleton of a solid Platonic is collection of points, vertices and sharp edges. And now you can see here that actually this this particular graph is planar. Clearly this is planar, and here if this point can be stretched here, then what we'll do is that this graph is same thing as and just make this point go up here. So 3 vertices, right? So here we can connect. So this is that extra point here that is missing. That moves here, and it is connected to this, this, and this. So you can connect it to this, this, and this like this. So this is a planar drawing of the same graph. This vertex goes out and connected. So this, even though this particular thing is 3-dimensional, it's a 2-dimensional. So we can always do, just take it for granted for the time being, that given a Platonic solid, its one skeleton is a planar graph. And using the Euler's theorem, what we can show with some analysis is following: that there are only so let us say what is the m? M is the number of just n edges, and m is the number of faces. So if n equal to number of vertices and m is equal to number of faces adjacent to each vertex, then there are only 5 choices. Five choices for the pair n, n. This is a tremendous classification of Platonic solid, one of the very striking applications of graph theory. And those are 3, 3, which is tetrahedron, 3, 4, what is n? N is something like this. I'll just take a couple of minutes extra. Yeah, so n is not the number of vertices, n is the number of edges bounding every face. If m is the number of faces, so basically we have 3, 3, 3, 4, 3, 5. 4, 3 and 5, 3. And for each one we have all the 5 exist, and the names are this gives me 3, 3 gives me tetrahedron. Then this is octahedron. Then this is icosahedron. Four three is cube, and 5-3 is dodecahedron. 4-5 dodecahedron. So this was one of the very crowning achievements of application of graph theory, and this is how we will end today's lecture. So what we did today was definition of graph theory, certain concepts, properties which are inherent or isomorphisms, and study of planar graphs. We also solved some problems. So I wish you all the best, and I hope that this particular lecture has made you interested in graph theory, and you look up on further details in the topics.